Joel Smith, football coach. How are you?
I'm very well, Lee Addison, rugby league coach.
Mate, the first question on everyone's lips right now. Have you paid your Wi-Fi bill this week?
It's automatic, mate. So, yeah, there's no problems with that.
I wonder what it was. It's a good job we called it pilot episodes. Even though this is episode 3, it feels like it's episode 493. And it's a good job we called them pilot episodes because of the technical issues we've had in the last week. All we're doing is a live cross on Facebook. Isn't it?
My whole life's a pilot episode.
Just for those who haven't seen this before, at the minute it's me and Joel. In future weeks, it's probably going to be 3 of us. We're going to get different guests on. I'm just drinking coffee in my living room. Joel's somewhere in his house, and he's a soccer coach of high credential. I'm just a rugby league coach who started last week.
Well, really talk yourself up there. Well done.
What happens is Joel asks me a question, I ask him a question, and then we go to some viewer questions that have been sent through. And on that note, if you want to send us through some questions now, nothing rude, nothing too bad, we will answer them live during this Coffee with the Coaches, episode 3. Joel, can we switch it up a bit, and can you go first?
Yeah, actually, before I jump into a question, I just want to thank the Foxy down at on Bryant's Road there for my wonderful coffee. There you go. Go and do yourself a favour and get yourself...
well, they sent me one too. We're on the same...
Yeah, no. Cheers. First of all, cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah, my first question to you, Lee, is I suppose it's a little bit... there's 2 questions to it, 2 sides to it. So what do you think about the importance of having a club-focused model or curriculum philosophy that is implemented, I suppose, more from a youth development point of view that I suppose filters up into a first team? I suppose, yeah, so on that, then what happens, or how do you deal with a coach that maybe wants to go away from that that philosophy of the club that they've put in place?
Okay, so first of all, the first part of your question was how important is it to have what you use the word curriculum, which is exactly what it is, particularly if you come from a teaching background, but it's actually building blocks. So, you know, under 10 you might do A and B, under 11 you might do A, B, C, under 12 A, B, C, D, so on and so forth. I think it's hugely important because if you think about how we learn anything, we tend not to learn it to expertise level in 5 minutes. We need to work on it and work on it and work on it. And the whole theory of 10,000 hours, whatever it may be, give or take a few hours either side. But ultimately, the reality is it's a lot of work. And to have a club coaching philosophy and to have that from juniors all the way up, it is magnificent because there's certain things that players can learn, and when they move to the next year level, they don't have to relearn them. So it basically gives more room for them to learn other things, and it allows them to learn other things. And it means that the previous things that they've learned are learned behaviour. So let's just take, for example, let's go under 18s, under 21s, opens. Let's just say that, right? Whatever the sport. You can probably learn at under 18s, and you can probably take on board and have the ability to take on board most of the tactical implementations that the senior coach wants you to take on. Your understanding of those may be a little bit lower than a senior player because obviously they've got the experience built up over years, but those concepts can be introduced to you so that when you come through the club, 18s, 21s, opens, they're second nature to you by the time you get to opens, and the junior coach is therefore doing the work, some of the work for the senior coach, with core skills and with other skills that involve just a small group of people. they're quite often skills that, and I've used this analogy before, brushing your teeth. You can't brush your teeth for a week, a year, and hope that your teeth are going to be all right for the rest of the year. You've got to keep doing it every day, and get incremental improvements. I've just seen one comment as we've been talking about club mandate. All rules should be simple, but take the enjoyment of the game away from the kids up until... Yeah, and I tend to agree with you, Craig, that so, like, I worked under Des Hasler at Manly, and he wanted simple philosophies. His coaching coordinator at the time was Dennis Moore and then Kelly Egan. They wanted simple philosophies going down so that there was second nature by the time they got to first grade. I think it's really important from a coaching perspective too, because everybody's working together, Joel. So I think if you're an assistant or a lower grade coach at a club, you've got to defer to the head coach, whether you agree with them, whether you don't agree with them. If you want to survive in that organisation, you've got to have an element of deference. And what you've got to have is a relationship whereby you can suggest something and thrash it out that might be different. And then, but once you walk away from that meeting, you've got to be loyal to that coach. That's what club coaching is. And you mentioned a rogue element. I think if the head coach manages this properly, if they communicate exactly what they want and why they want it and the benefits it will bring to the club, then 99 times out of 100, if he's got good people or she's got good people around them, most coaches will come on board with that. And yes, the lower coaches may have different ideas, but there'll be a good relationship where they can bring them to the table in a public forum, as in coaching public forum, and thrash them out in an adult manner. But then once you leave the room, you've got to be unanimous. You've got to be together. And I think you'd agree with that. And I think if there's a rogue element, well, number one, it tends to happen because the coach either doesn't agree with what the head coach is trying to tell them and thinks they're better. Number two, it could be that they just haven't listened and have no desire to listen or too much going on to listen. And I don't think they realise sometimes the damage they are doing, because I don't always think it's malicious either. Because if you're the 18s coach, for example, and you do your own thing, the under-21s coach has got to start from fresh and teach new principles again. How do you deal with that? Well, I think it all depends on the scenario. It depends on the environment that you're in. If it's volunteers, I think you just need to try and manage it and try and use some persuasive skills. If it's employment, then obviously employment law could come into that, or something contractual. If it's high quality rep stuff, then I think people have to be comfortable being uncomfortable and having some difficult conversations. But I think ultimately a club coaching philosophy is really important because it provides building blocks. What say you, Joel Smith, soccer coach?
From football's perspective, it's very similar. We try and split it a bit more. I think you spoke about more of the very later parts of youth development when you talk about under 18s, under 21s, or in our game under 23s. And I suppose by under 23s, there needs to be very least the principles of how you play the game need to be the same as the first team. I'm a massive fan of having the first team separate to 18s or even under 16s and below, because I think if you look at it, if you particularly look at it from a promotion, relegation, semi-pro, professional level, the first team's all about results. So the first team coach needs full autonomy, needs to do what he needs to do to get results and maintain their position in a league, or get promoted, or go and win the league, whatever the expectation is of the club and why he's been put in that job. So I think for me, a club philosophy in terms of youth development needs to be separate, a separate playing style, a separate team model to that of a first team, because of the transient nature of a first team coaching staff or head coach. That can change a little bit. I think clubs try and hire coaches that have, or they want to hire a certain coach that has a similar philosophy to the way that they want their first team to play. But at the end of the day, I think it really needs to be separate. So those building blocks, as you called it, all those phases of development within a youth program need to be explicitly outlined. I think there needs to be a working, living, breathing curriculum that someone's in charge of in football, in the NPL and the state leagues, which is the elite level of youth development. It's in
Australia.
Yeah, in Australia, it's a technical director position. So they're the ones who are, I suppose, the gatekeeper of the curriculum, and they are the ones who are responsible for putting in coach mentor programs and helping their coaches implement the document, whatever that might be. And I think at the end of the day, I think that comment was talking about, you can't overcoach. It was something along the lines of, or hinting at overcoaching the kids and taking away the enjoyment. That has to be part of the curriculum. Otherwise, you'll burn kids out. They won't turn up. So the way that you coach, the focus, it needs to have balance, yes. But if you're in that elite level where basically the kids have goals and dreams and aspirations to play football professionally, then you need to have that ability within your curriculum to develop the players that are going to have the necessary skills and tactical knowledge, and to one day hopefully play in a first team. So
just rounding off that, Joel. At one point, you talked about a transient model, and you talked about a living and breathing curriculum. I think one thing I didn't allude to in my answer to your question was that different teams do require different coaching, right? And I think it's about having a open, frank, and honest discussion, and holding coaching staff to that discussion is the key. So if you're going to say with the head coach, I'm going to try and coach exactly the same as you. However, I do have some bigger players who are a bit less mobile. I need to do a bit more of this. I think that's, and less of that. I think that's a really fair discussion to have. I remember having that conversation with Des Hasler when I was at Manly. I had a team of, I can't remember if they were bigger or smaller, but I needed to adjust the way we played a little bit based on their strengths. But I was still working within Des Hasler's overall overarching philosophy.
Yeah, so you've your principles there, obviously.
Yeah.
They're those overarching, those global principles, if you want to call it that. And then
global.
I think as a coach, you need to have a certain level of autonomy as well, because otherwise you're not a robot or just a shadow of a TD or at the senior level. If you're, say, you're a reserves grade coach or under 23s, under 21s coach, you're not just a robot of the first team coach. So I think those overarching principles, the team model needs to be the same, but there's a certain framework, and you need to have your professional own professional judgment as that second tier coach to be able to implement it, and because your learners or your players, so you can adapt that model to the art and science of teaching or coaching, if you want to call it that. So you've got to have that ability to be able to still play within that structure, but the way you go about coaching it and the way that you go about implementing it needs to be, you need to have autonomy over that, because at the end of the day, you're in charge of that team, and your role is to help as many progress into that first team. And it would be silly not to coach the same principles and coach and play in the same structure as if it's a first team level, because if they go in and they get their opportunity to play in the first team and not know what they're doing, then you haven't done your job properly either. So you've got there's a balance there as well. On the flip side of it, in the academies, I suppose, if you want to call it that, from that, say, under 9s to under 16s, under 18s level, yeah, I think there you have to be a little bit. The coaches need to be have the same. They need to have that autonomy with their squad, but they have to work within the framework or the policy of the club the organisation where they're working. But there's always needs to be a balance. So I think dealing with people that or coaches that don't want to buy into that. One, why are they there? Is it a poor appointment from the club? Can you have a conversation about it? Let them share their viewpoints. Come to some sort of arrangement, some sort of compromise, I suppose, in the end, and work with that coach. If then they don't want to do it, or they just want to do their own thing, then you have to have a difficult conversation.
Next question, my question to Joel. Do you coach game management with your players? It's a term that's grown in rugby league over the last few years. He's a good game manager. She's a good game manager.
Okay, Rabs.
Yeah, so apply that to soccer for me, mate.
All right, so I suppose it's something that's obviously been around. We talk about game management. We're talking about, for those that aren't quite sure what we're going on about, we're talking about you might be up 1-0 in a game and you've got a team.
Park the bus, park the bus, park the bus.
All right, Mourinho, settle down. So, yeah, so that's it. So how do you adjust your team to, I suppose, go on and get a result? How teaching players at a youth level, I think, is extremely important to be able to do that for their careers and how they move on and progress in their game. But, yeah, so it's something that I haven't really focused on in terms of my coaching when it comes to developing, I suppose, scenarios in game training about, like, you might throw in, we're 1-0 down and we might be doing a attack versus defense type of exercise, and I might say to the attacking team, you're 1-0 down, there's 5 minutes left, we put on the clock. How do we go about breaking down this deep defensive block? So that might be a way of coaching it. I read recently an interesting study out of the FA. A coach, I think his first name is Ben. That's all I remember from the article in terms of his name. What he did was
Great stuff, Ben. Great stuff, Ben.
He developed a tournament. So at a tournament level, he put parameters and constraints, and they had about 3 games. They had 20-minute games. If you won your first game, you would then play in a couple of games' time. You'd play that team, but the score would be reversed. So there was different things of how they go about and have discussions with players. So this was over, I suppose, a couple of nights training. How you go about overturning let's say they won the first game 3-1. When they come and play that team in the next 20 minutes, they've got to overturn that result. So, and then vice versa for the other team. They're down, they've lost 3-1. All of a sudden, they've got to come back and they've got to defend a 3-1 lead. So those types of discussion points and learning experiences for the players came out of it, and it was an interesting way of looking at how you, number one, make players aware of what is game management. You know, you see players in tournaments in World Cups and the Euros that just went on. There's 5 minutes to go and all of it, they're up 1-0. All of a sudden, when they get possession, they knock it down in the corner and the player holds it around the corner flag and hopes, waste time so that the opponent can't get the ball. So there's those ways of managing the game. All those things, influencing referees, making substitutions late in the game to waste a bit of time. I suppose on the sneaky side of things, making a little foul in the opponent's defensive half so you can get back and get your structure and your defensive structure, so making it harder for them. And on the flip, maybe you sit deep and you're down 1-0, you sit deep so that you can try and pinch the ball and hit on the counter and use the space in behind. So all those things, I suppose, are elements and principles that you can focus on with your players because there are times when they become senior players, they have to get results. So I think we can't ignore that in our youth development curriculums to be able to develop players holistically.
Game management in rugby league is, I don't think it's really gone down the system yet. So a lot of players I deal with, particularly attacking players, and by that I mean halves, centres, wings, etc., they very much seem to think about that set, so that particular set. Whereas the reality is most tries are scored as a result of an accumulation of 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 sets. And quite often it's from building pressure and forcing the opposition into mistakes and tiring them out. And far too much of rugby league coaching, and some of this is at the NRL level too, but because too many coaches literally just do 3 plays in and then shift the ball, try and put on a set play to disrupt the defensive line. You know, if you think about how tries are scored from kickoff, for example, rarely does a team score straight in that set from a kickoff. So it has to be a build-up of a few sets. And that's what game management is. Game management is controlling the game of rugby league from that perspective, knowing that you can't or don't have to score in that set. You might get the repeat set. You might kick and walk to a scrum. You might kick to avoid the fullbacks. I know the other day I was watching an NRL game, and I think it was against Tedesco or Tommy Turbo. But they actually, the opposition tried to kick the ball straight into touch so that that fullback could not return it really strongly. So things like that are game management. How do you coach it? Well, I do a hell of a lot of 13 versus 13. And depending on the team I've got, that will either be grab, structured in terms of play the ball speed, 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever. And sometimes I do full contact. And I make it obligatory that they play it like a game. And we might play for 10 minutes and say, right, what were the game scenarios that we had there? What would have happened after you scored that try if you'd have completed the next 5 sets, etc., etc. So, yeah, game management is really important. While we were talking, mate, and I'm going to test your mental agility here. We were talking about working under a head coach, and I think at one point you mentioned the experience of the coach and the type of coach you would get, whether there'd be an experienced coach, inexperienced coach. So that led me to throw in another question,
right?
That we can both discuss, and it's about a coach's evolution. Joel, I want you to think back from the very first time you picked up a football and coached a team. You might have done that as a captain of a team or a senior player, and you might not have had a coach, so you stepped up and delivered something. Or you might have made a conscious decision to turn into a coach and say, right, this is my first session. And I know for you, it was 123 years ago. But I want you to think about your evolution as a coach and just briefly articulate that. What was that coach like at the start compared to now, and what changes have happened along the time?
I suppose like a lot of footballers, you dream and you work hard because you want to be a pro, and that obviously didn't happen for me for obvious reasons. But obviously I wanted to play as long as I could. So, and while I was playing, I was getting, when I was playing senior football, I was getting married, I was finishing my degree, all the things of life happened, but I kept playing, and I was fortunate enough to pick up I suppose it was a second teaching job. I did a little 4-week contract first at another school, and then I got the gig at Cav Road, which was really fell on my feet. I did a prac there previously. Fella who set it up, Bill McLean was his name. He did a fantastic job. It was one of the first ever football academies in Queensland in a school run under HPE. So he was one of my teacher mentors when I did my first prac. And then obviously I got a full-time teaching role at the school a bit later on, a couple of years later, and he moved. It was actually his position. He moved on, and I was really fell on my feet with a fella that was there coaching named Rado Vidicic. So he's a pro coach now. He's won a couple of A-League titles with Brisbane Roar as assistant coach. He was head coach for a little bit. He's gone to a few different A-League clubs, Sydney FC, Melbourne Victory, Wellington. He's been around a bit, Wellington, Phoenix, and NZ. He's now in working for Melbourne City FC. So he's the W League coach there. He won a title a couple seasons ago in his first year there with the W League side. So he sort of really inspired me to become a coach. His knowledge, the way he treated players, the sessions he put on. I was like, no disrespect to the coaches I had coming when I was growing up and coming through my football development, but it was next level. It was something that I'd never experienced before, and I was like, wow, this guy is unbelievable, and I wish I had him as a player. So that sort of inspired me to become a coach. I was still, 21, 22, first teaching gig, still wanted to get in and play with the boys, the senior boys and all that sort of stuff. And he humoured me with that. So, but yeah, just picking up on how he thought about the game, how he thought about his session design, practice design, was something that was new in our game, in our country. And it was no surprise that, he's gone where he has with his coaching. So I suppose in terms of where that sort of got me into coaching, and then how I evolved, I suppose, was knowing I wasn't good enough, knowing that I wanted to really give my coaching a shake. I didn't, I suppose, give myself enough credit and chance as a player, didn't back myself enough, and that was something that I wanted to not have an excuse with my coaching. So I've really, dug in, done lots of hours. You watch the game. You've got, as I can say to any young coach coming through, don't watch the game as a fan. Watch it as you're analysing it. Analyse and watch as much football as you can. That's the biggest thing I would say to people. Get your own knowledge of the game. Do as much reading about other coaches and other things around the game as well. And start to build your own thoughts, philosophies, opinions on the game, and then that leads into your ability then to start to be able to structure coaching sessions, training practices that are going to help your players, that are going to develop your players in the way that that's going to accelerate or help them learn and become better players tactically and technically. So for me, that's the biggest thing. And then, obviously there's not enough money in our game in football in Australia. So you've got to do your time. You've got to be prepared to do coaching clinics and for nothing or next to nothing in terms of money. Take jobs where you can and surround yourself with people that are knowledgeable and learn from them. Be open-minded and learn from them. Don't be so stuck in your ways or think that you know more than someone else that's had a lot more experience. Actually, use them. Use the people around you. In a good way. Learn as much as you can from them and use that for yourself. And take the bits and pieces that you can from people. And that way, I think you're going to put yourself in good stead. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, after we had your life story for 20 minutes. No, I asked about your evolution as a coach. My evolution as a coach, I started copying the two best coaches that I've had.
Oh, you're a copy and paste man.
No. I had 3 days notice for my first ever head coaching job at the age of 19.
Yeah. Right.
So I think I had some mitigating circumstances. And I went, geez, what am I going to do? I knew how to sort of galvanise players. I knew how to, because I played a bit as a captain, so I knew how to say, come on, boys, let's go, or what are you doing? Why did you miss that tackle, you know? So I literally thought of the couple of best coaches that I've ever had, and one of them was Vinny Webb, who's still my coaching mentor to this day. Hello, Vinny. And I was literally a carbon copy in that first year. But I was also lucky, because I started so young, having done a season. I tried to be a player coach, but I ended up just coaching because I had a job at the time and I didn't want to go and work with black eyes. I had a part-time job that was like in an office. So after that, I actually had some time where I wasn't coaching for a while. So I literally decided to challenge every single common thought in rugby league. So as a young man, I was about 21, 22. And I studied the game for 1 year. I thought, I'm not going to coach. I'm not going to play. I'm just going to study it. And I watched, and I watched, and I watched. And I challenged absolutely every common thought. I thought, when I come out of this process after this year, if there's a thought in rugby league that's been happening for 100 years, and I still accept that, it has to be because it's come through my mental ringer, where I challenge everything. And when I say I challenge everything, I literally thought of the game from the kickoff. So why does that person catch the ball there and give that ball to that big person there? I challenged everything.
Come on.
Eh?
So to be a battering ram, come on.
Yeah. So, and my question is why? And I kept asking that question, why? And as a result, when I came out of that and started getting in the mix for coaching jobs, I actually had a completely different coaching philosophy, and it was mine. And it was with the best bits that I'd taken, but also after 1 year of critical analysis. I remember it. I was in England, and I used to get up and watch the NRL games early. And then that's how I started. And then if I think about my evolution, I used to coach trying to tell people how much I knew. So I tried to be the smart. I started trying to be the smartest man or boy in the room.
Players.
And I've got to be honest, the amount of coaches that still do that as adults,
yeah,
and people fall for it because they think, what most people think is they think, I mustn't be intelligent enough to understand all this stuff that he or she's saying. That's what players and people around them tend to think. They tend to defer to that person. But my coaching evolution over time has been about refining that message. And as you get older, and I'm only 27 now, but as you get older,
oh please,
you realise some things aren't important, and you realise what's important, what's not important. I think they call it slicing. And you also mentioned too, reading and studying. We'll see the bookshelves behind me. I mean, particularly those that are out of shot there, they're just coaches from different sports and mostly soccer, to be honest. So I could sit and have a massive debate with you about soccer coaches and philosophies because I've always read about them. And somebody asked me yesterday, who have been your biggest influences as a coach? And I'm going to list them now. I said 4 yesterday, but it's actually 5. Vinny Webb, who I mentioned. He was the first coach I worked under who made me realise that it was very different to playing. It was a science and an art. It was not about, come on boys, let's smash them. He was the first coach that really taught me that as a player. And then I've been lucky enough to have him in my life ever since. David Waite, who used to be the Newcastle Knights and St George head coach, he came over to be Great Britain coach and performance director, and he put in a massive curriculum in England, and we used to be on national camps and regional camps, and he'd just come, and he had a habit. He used to just stand and talk to you in the lunch queue and challenge you on something. And what I always remember about Waite was that if he was having a meeting in a room, a seminar, he'd want to know literally everything about that room. How big's the screen? How many seats are in there? What are the air conditioning and the cooling options? What are the heating options if you're in England? What are the dimensions of the room? Where in the room is the television? So on and so forth. And he taught me that about coaching rugby league. So when you are doing a scrimmage session or a unopposed session, instead of just going, oh, we'll have a few that way and then a few that way, you know, have 5 that way and don't go off that 5 until you're happy with that 5. So if you end up having 425 just to get 5 right, you do your 5 and then you do your 5 from the other side. And Waite gave me that. Des Hasler taught me a lot in terms of leaving no stone unturned. Des used to get in the office at Sparrow's Fart and leave at midnight or something. He was crazy like that. But it was all about key performance indicators from my memory and leaving no stone unturned. And it was analysis, 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 analysis. And one thing about Des is I think he's been so successful because he will literally leave no stone unturned. He will burn the midnight oil to get results for his players, and ultimately his players respect him for that. And then I've got to be honest, the other 2 coaching influences have come from books. Alex Ferguson, the old Manchester United manager, and Brian Clough, the old Nottingham Forest and Derby County manager. And the evolution of the coach, therefore, to summarise that, has gone from copying, coming up with my own philosophy, refining that over years by spending time with quality coaches and reading books. So that's been the coaching journey.
I think the common elements between our 2 stories is analysing, watching as much of your game as possible, and learning and really studying the game, being a student of the game, and having good mentors around you, learning from people, putting yourself in positions where you can learn from those more experienced and take at the end of the day, take from it that suits you, because you have to be yourself at the end of the day. If you try and be someone else, it's a recipe for failure. You've got to be yourself, and there's no escaping who you are with your personality. I've learnt that the hard way. You can't try and change and sound like someone else. You can't try and be them as well. You've got to be yourself. And that way you can then identify your strengths and weaknesses and work on both of those. Keep getting better at what you do well, and really focus in and hone in on the things that you need, the gaps in you as a coach. For me, one of those things is man management. That's something that, you know, I've got to keep having opportunities to work on, particularly with adults, like senior players. That's something that you know, I'm looking for more opportunities to work with, and I think that's it. You never.
Does that mean you're a crap bloke? Is that what you're saying?
No. I think it's more the fact of, you know, obviously trying to.
I think you're all right, Joel. I don't know.
Yeah, no.
I can't speak for the rest of everyone, but yeah.
You wouldn't want to. Yeah, I think at the end, it's like it's another discussion point. Is that man management? What's the literature on it? How do you best do it? But I think at the end of the day, you've got to be yourself, and you can only be yourself, and trying to, I suppose, when you're managing people, it's up managing, it's convincing, it's trying to get them on the same page, that sort of stuff, and trying
it's
to
funny.
Self-motivate them. They have
it's
to,
funny.
From within.
We're in a period at the minute where we've probably seen more of our politicians on television than ever because of the old Rona. And I always look at these politicians and chief medical officers and the like, chief police officers, whatever else is happening on there. And my first thought that comes into my head is, how would they do coaching a football team? Or in a classroom?
Yeah.
Because we're in the people business, aren't we?
Yeah, that's it.
So ultimately, there's been a lot of coaches over time who don't talk as much technical dribble as others, but they get the best out of their players because they know how to manage them.
Yeah. I think classically, like when I was the assistant coach, I was able to be a part of the first team training sessions, and when Rado was the head coach, I was able to do little bits and pieces with the players. But before that, when Ange Postecoglou, who's now the Celtic manager, and starting to hit his strides there and do really well, just beat a team 6-0 in the Scottish Premier League. He was classic that he has a wealth of knowledge tactically and really strong how he wants to play the game, real strong philosophy on that. But he surrounds himself with technicians in terms of those that can coach the game on the pitch. He can do it himself, and I've seen him, but he makes sure he has good staff around him that can coach his philosophy, that can put in place what he wants and how he wants the game played. And he is just a master at managing people. And that's why I think he's so successful, because he's got both. That's his strength, and he knows that he's got other people around him that on the pitch, designing the activities, the practices, that's going to impart the knowledge on the players of how they're going to play his system in each moment of the game, in each third of the pitch. And he just galvanizes and gets all the players on board with his ways.
When I think of coaches like Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, and it really hurts because I'm a big Manchester City fan, but I mean, ultimately, he was a fantastic coach and manager. But he also had longevity and stayed in the game for a long time. And another one in rugby league has been Wayne Bennett. He's now 142 and still thinks that he's not finished coaching the game. And I think both of them over the years have clearly shown an ability to evolve in terms of how they deal with humans. And it's something that Alex Ferguson documents an awful lot in a lot of his books. The things that used to worry and impact David Beckham or Ronaldo in the 2000s plus weren't the things that used to bother McGrath, Whiteside and Robson in the mid-80s. We had different things. We had different fashion sense. We had different ways of life. We had different technologies, and we were also there was also the growth of money in the Premier League and agents and wealth, and that brings other problems. But Alex Ferguson adjusted that from a purely coaching and, for want of a better term, teaching and learning or pedagogical point of view. What Alex Ferguson, I think, did over time was get real high quality coaches who delivered what he wanted. So he ended up managing the environment more. But he was still the boss, and they were still playing Alex Ferguson football. But because he talks loads about this, the ability to step back and observe and make changes that way. And I think of my own coaching environment, and I think the sweet spot of my coaching was when I'd spent 3+ years with the same coaches at Ipswich State High School. I literally, again, and this brings everything together, I'd had a youth development system where the players had been in one structure, and they were coming into seniors. But I'd also spent so much time with all those coaches, so we all were singing off the same hymn sheet, and that was a sweet spot. And I reckon my best year of coaching was the year that I did the least coaching.
Mm. It's funny that,
and I think about, and that's because I've done all the coaching with the assistants and the players over the years. It's like I've been a parent, if you're still wiping the backside of your 18-year-old and brushing his or her teeth, you've not been a very good parent. You've got to let them go at some point. It's the same thing. And another longevity master has been Wayne Bennett. He's done the same. I remember a couple of periods where he changed assistant coaches. Things weren't right, so he changed assistants. He changed conditioning coaches. And over the last decade, he's basically changed clubs. So he's allowed himself to stay fresh. Joel, we've done about 45 minutes talking about sweet spots. The time that we're doing this, people in England are going to bed. People in New Zealand are probably already at work. People in Australia are waking up, brushing their teeth, hopefully, having a shower, hopefully, and then going to work. So, yeah, get your mask on. So, you know, obviously, the live engagement is really important to us. But if you watch this and you think of a question, guys, send it through. I've got a list of questions here that me and Joel and our guests are going to get through over the coming weeks.
Those that are watching through JS Football, private message me through my Facebook page, or email me. It's all on my Facebook page where you can get that information. Yeah, love to answer any questions that you have from my perspective. So don't be shy, send them through.
And as usual, this will be on the Facebook page, and we'll put bits up on YouTube. I'll edit everything out of Joel and just put me on there.
Yeah, I noticed that.
You've got to do your editing for you. I need another coffee, Joel. I'm off. Take care of yourself.
All right, you too. Thanks for the chat. See ya.